SpakovskyShow.com.
Listen to podcasts of Joe Walsh and Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. We talked about it last week. Another one of these illustrious socialist freshmen moved to allow for 16-year-olds to vote. Now, this proposal of Representative Presley from Massachusetts failed in the House, 126 to 105. I think it was 126, 105. But the interesting thing is it was majority of Democrats voted for it. Majority of House Democrats voted for Presley's amendment to allow 16-year-olds to vote, 125 to 108, or 126 to 108 voted in favor. On the voting front, that wasn't the only thing that we're doing. House Democrats voted Friday to defend localities that allow illegal immigrants to vote in municipal elections. The For the People Act. This is persons in this country legally can't vote in federal elections, but federal law prohibits non-citizens from voting in federal elections. No prohibition on localities from providing that, and there have been places like Tacoma Park in Maryland that are now providing for persons in this country illegally to vote in municipal elections. Dan Crenshaw saying of this, "It sounds like I'm making it up. What kind of government would cancel the vote of its own citizens and replace it with non-citizens?" Yeah, well, that's what they did. So that's the program for Democrats to grow their party. 16-year-old illegal immigrants can vote. How about that? And you know what Illinois is focused on with respect to this whole matter of persons in this country illegally?
Yeah.
I mean, since we've already done the sanctuary state, sanctuary city, sanctuary county business, all that.
Sanctuary schools.
Will Guzzardi, who's a socialist state rep from Chicago, introduced legislation to require the Illinois Investment Policy Board to make its best effort to identify all companies that contract to build a border wall and includes those companies in the list of restricted companies for purposes of investment distributed to each retirement system in the Illinois State Board of Investment. So in other words, the state is not allowed to invest resources, pension funds, in anything associated with companies directly or as part of larger investments that would include companies that are contracted to build any sort of border barrier.
Yeah, so there's political payback for your company if you decide to participate in building the wall.
For more on the voting piece of this, we're pleased to be joined again by Hans von Spakovsky. He's Senior Legal Fellow for the Heritage Foundation, former FEC Commissioner, and former lawyer for DOJ. Hans, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for having me on.
So the Democrats, look, they want to get young people more involved in civics. Young people have a say in federal elections, Representative Presley said. Our young people are organizing, mobilizing, calling us to action. They're at the forefront of social and legislative movements and have earned inclusion in our democracy. So what's wrong with allowing 16-year-old persons in this country illegally and up to vote?
Well, it's just amazing to me the hypocrisy here because, here these folks are saying that 16-year-olds have the maturity and judgment to be able to vote. Anybody who's ever had kids knows that's not true. But if, in fact, that assumption is true, and that's what the sponsors of this are saying, well, then obviously why aren't they pushing to lower the drinking age to 16? Why aren't they lowering the age at which you're adult and can sign contracts to 16? If these kids are so mature, why shouldn't they be able to decide for themselves whether to buy a drink or not? Why shouldn't they be able to decide for themselves whether or not to sign a contract to buy a car or anything else? There's quite a dichotomy there between those two.
Oh, and also, too, how about staying on mom and dad's insurance till 26? I guess you're not mature enough to make health insurance decisions before 26, but to vote on those who would make health insurance policy decisions, 16 will do.
Right, or listen, if they have that kind of judgment, shouldn't we start bringing 16-year-olds in to sit on juries and make decisions in, assault and murder cases and things like that?
Yeah, and no celebrity would be convicted. Oh, no celebrity's convicted anyway
Right.
of any crimes because they're celebrities. But I don't want 16-year-olds to drive, let alone to vote. So where do you think this is going to go from here?
I don't think it's going to go anywhere. By the way, it should also be pointed out that Congress certainly can't change the age at which you vote to 16. We had to have a constitutional amendment, remember, during the Vietnam War,
Right.
the 26th Amendment, in order to allow 18-year-olds to vote. Because remember, back then it was 21. And in fact, when Congress tried to do that by a federal statute, Oregon ended up suing, and it went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said Congress can't force the states to lower the drinking age. The voting age, although that's probably quite a slip there. You have to do it through a constitutional amendment.
I wanted to get your take on a couple of these FEC complaints that have been lodged against some other freshman superstars, socialist superstars, Representatives Tlaib and AOC. Tlaib first, the issue of paying herself a salary from campaign funds during the course of her election, the rules and regulations regarding that.
That can be done under the FEC regulations, but it's almost never done because questions always arise there as to whether or not are you really being paid the fair market value? You know, what is the actual value, and are you overpaid and profiting from your campaign funds? And that's why folks almost never do that. It's very easy to get into big trouble and end up using that money to pay personal expenses. And you all recall that the former Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. got into big trouble for that, ended up in prison over it.
Right, and even though you're allowed to do it, there's windows when you're not allowed to do it, and this is the issue with Tlaib.
Right. When it comes to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she actually, I think, is potentially in very big trouble. I actually published a piece at Fox over the weekend that kind of goes through this, because it turned out that at the very same time she was running her campaign organization, she and her campaign manager were also controlling a separate political action committee that was not only helping to get her elected, but other Democratic candidates. That means there may have been all kinds of things going on between these two committees, such as people potentially, first of all, reporting violations, but second, if she and her campaign manager controlled a second organization that was also working on her campaign, that means potentially she may have gotten excess contributions. What I mean by that is back in the 2018 election cycle, the most you could contribute, the maximum to a candidate was $2,700. Well, if somebody maxed out to her campaign, but then also gave money to a separate PAC that she, however, controlled, then she was getting excess contributions.
And what was she giving to her now chief of staff? Wasn't he?
Well, her chief of staff, by the way, had this limited liability company that he formed, and that limited liability company got almost $1 million paid by her and by her PAC for supposedly strategic consulting. But in fact, they were basically running her campaign, doing everything for it, and that means that they didn't properly report what that money was being used for.
I also wanted another FEC case, seem to be multiplying these days, but the curious case of the deal that Aaron Schock was able to secure after there was a lot of evidence, not just with his Downton Abbey decorations, but reimbursements for more mileage in his congressional vehicle than there were actually miles on the odometer. Seems like more than an innocent reporting mistake. But for there to be 24 felony accounts, and then for him to be able to walk away by paying the IRS money owed, paying his campaign committee back money owed, for him to walk away with just that and essentially misdemeanor conviction, seems like federal prosecutors, the FEC, somebody screwed up somewhere here.
Well, this was being handled by the Justice Department, and the way to understand the difference here is that the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, they only handle civil violations of the law. The Justice Department is responsible for criminal violations, and the difference between the two is if you intentionally and knowingly violate the law, then it goes from just being a civil violation to a criminal violation. I don't know the details of why the prosecutor's office, U.S. attorneys there, thought that they should go the direction they did. I don't know if I don't think they've really explained why they entered into the deal that they did. So I can't explain it.
Do you have any idea though why they would have entered into that deal that they made?
Well, the only thing I can think of is that somehow maybe there wasn't sufficient evidence for the kind of criminal violations they thought had occurred, or maybe he was able to give some kind of explanation, or maybe his lawyers somehow explained what the law requires to him in the wrong way. I mean, without getting an explanation from the prosecutor's office of why they did that deal and didn't actually go to court and prosecute, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think they have a good explanation, which is why they're choosing silence instead. I think there was some mistakes, if not unethical conduct, on behalf of federal prosecutors in the case that's sort of being brushed aside, which is also problematic. But anyway, he is Hans von Spakovsky, Senior Legal Fellow for the Heritage Foundation, former FEC Commissioner and lawyer at DOJ. Hans, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Sure, thanks for having me.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.